UFOs. A topic that continues to fascinate the public, and it has for decades. Now, after more than 50 years of denying interest in the topic, the U.S. military and certain members of Congress want answers. Recent documents obtained by the Black Vault prove that more is going on behind the scenes than has been reported by the mainstream media. From classified briefings to Pentagon spokespeople who clearly don't want to talk, what's this all really mean to you and I? Stay tuned. You're about to journey inside the Black Vault. That's right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast or your live stream of choice. Now, if you're like the majority of those out there that tune into this program, you're listening to it on the podcast feed. Well, just know if you go to theblackvault.com/live, that will bounce you to the YouTube channel where the majority of these shows appear first in video form. Now, I always prefer and urge you to watch them simply because, well, I know you don't want to stare at my ugly mug the entire time, but rather the visuals that I show along the way. Now, it might get a little bit redundant if you are watching because I'm reading things when I do get to certain slides, but that's for the audio version so everybody can follow along. That being said, as always, I do urge, if you can, add those reviews or press the thumbs up, share these videos, put those 5 stars out there, which is what I aim for on the podcast version because it helps a lot. So if you're watching, that thumbs up button's down there. If you're listening, whichever way, whichever platform it is, iTunes, Stitcher, you name it, the Black Vault Radio is generally on there. Any type of review helps a lot. Now let's dive into the show. Now, what are we talking about today? Well, this is the week that this video drops of the U.S. presidential election. Now, as I'm recording this, we're pretty close to having a president, but we don't have one yet. That's probably pretty much going to change even by the time that this video dumps, but regardless, it has been a heck of a week. But hidden within this election craziness was some pretty exciting things when it comes to the UFO or UAP topic. Obviously, I talk about that a lot on this channel because it's one of my favorite, but it's also what I get the most questions about. Now, if you follow me on social media, you probably saw my post about the UFO classified briefing within the House Armed Services Committee. I'm diving into that, and I was just going to do a quick blast, one of those quick videos that I put on this channel, but then I realized, you know what? Let's dive into the task force that's aimed to explore UAPs. We don't hear a lot about it. We've seen some stories here and there. This video aims to bring it all together. If you don't follow me on social media or you missed the post, let me start there. And what I want to do is, this was a discovery that I had made. This document had not been out before, although it was publicly available. It was not out there in the UFO community per se, that showed proof, documented proof, that classified briefings took place and when. Now, we do know about some of them, and I'll get to those in the end of the video when I go through a whole timeline for you guys. That way you have it all set in essentially black and white that you can reference and see how the last year and a half or so has played out. But this particular document, which was all about let me switch screens here, which was all about essentially a report on the House Armed Services Committee and I would say just the rundown of what they're doing. Now, this is a monthly report. This particular one was for March of 2020, so not too long ago. It's 2020, so it pretty much feels like, eternity as we go through the year here. But March 2020 was not too long ago. And one particular line stuck out right here on March 11th under the full committee progress. Again, showing a chronological breakdown of what the committee is doing. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Here's the March 11th entry where it says, March 11th, the task force met to receive a classified briefing on unidentified aerial phenomena. As it says right there, it's classified. The full report, should you want to download it, it's in the show notes or right here on the YouTube channel. Just go ahead and look down in the description. I link you right towards the document itself and an article I wrote about it that goes into a little bit more detail. But this report talked about this March 11th briefing, but that's it. It did not give any more information at all. There was nothing in addition to that one line. Now, this particular report, just so you know what it is, it's issued monthly, where it not only lists chronologically what the committee is doing, but also goes into the finances. And so if you want to know how much some of these people are making, like this guy, Paul, who's the staff director, making $173,900 a year, or a professional staff member, Heath, makes $130,000. Here's another $170,000. You might realize, like I did, I'm in the wrong business, because some of these individuals make an awful lot and you never hear about them. And all those $170,000+ salaries, they rack up pretty quick. But that's another video entirely. But it really dives kind of deep into the finances as well. That's what these particular documents are all about. And even though they are public, you just have to know where to look for them, or know that they're there and then go find them. My discovery of it was a little bit of luck, but I was trying to find proof that some of these committees are being briefed on UAPs, discovered this one, and voila, we had documented proof that a classified briefing took place. Some of you may feel that this has been reported before, and you're partially right. It has. And again, I'll get into the full timeline. This was the first time that I'm aware of that the House Armed Services Committee had a classified briefing on UAPs. What we've heard about before are senators and the Senate Armed Services Committee. Those are two different. One's from the House, one's from the Senate. Sounds confusing? It is. I made a mistake in my own head thinking that it was all the same and realized, obviously, that it was not. So it is very confusing, but this is more evidence that this topic is very much being taken seriously. Going back to the March 11th entry, you'll see that it talked about a task force. Now, you may also feel that this was also reported, but this was also much prior to the UAP task force that the Department of Defense has announced not too long ago. This was before that task force ever convened. So the question mark was, who was the task force, or what was the task force, and who was doing the briefing? Now, the task force portion of this was already tackled by Keith Basterfield and D. Dean Johnson, two great researchers. They offer a lot to these types of stories, and they were already theorizing what the task force was. It wasn't the UAP task force. I'll get into that in a moment. I was more interested in the briefer. Who was the one that was doing the actual briefing? And I posted out there on Twitter that I believed it was the Navy. And the reason was, and this is why it's very important on who, is because this then leads you to file a Freedom of Information Act request and go after the briefing material. Now, spoiler alert, I have done that. I am going after it. Those requests are still open. But now that you create kind of this timeline and a documented piece of evidence that this briefing took place, you start to put together the picture. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's tedious, and I'll admit, it's too slow and too tedious for a lot of us, me included. But sadly, that is research. That's how we go after it. I want to point you to this War Zone article. This War Zone article, and again, shout out to the guys over there, did a great job because Senator Mark Walker, who had reached out to the Navy, wrote a letter about the UAP topic back in July of 2019, wanted answers. And he wanted the Navy to essentially address all of this. Well, what the War Zone reported was the response. That had not been out before. Here's the letter that Mark Walker received. And one of the lines in here that's most important is this one here. We from the Navy. We will continue consultations with the House Armed Services Committee, which continues to be our primary entry point in the House for all updates related to this topic. So what I think we did here was connect the two dots. This letter had been floating out there since March of 2020, since the War Zone reported it. Shortly thereafter, an actual classified briefing took place with the House Armed Services Committee. Easy to deduce, it was the Navy that actually did it. That didn't stop a lot of theories floating around, and I do want to address this because a lot of people wrote me about this, and they thought, well, it probably wasn't the Navy, it was this man, Dr. Eric Davis. Well, if you recall from one of the videos on this channel, and if you haven't seen it, I urge you to look at it, I did a deep dive into the New York Times article and the claims that there were off-world vehicles as connected to the UAP phenomena. It pretty much surrounded this man right here. Ties to NIDS, Robert Bigelow's organization, ties to BASS, also Robert Bigelow's organization, BASS being the one that got the OSAP contract that was tied into the ATIP program, which we have heard time and time again was the Pentagon secret UFO program. The jury's still out on part of that, but I want to hone in on, again, the claims that this gentleman gave a classified briefing in as early as March of this year. People deduce that as, that this is proof that Davis gave these briefings and the New York Times was accurate. That is actually not true. Here's why. This is apart from the New York Times article, classified briefing to a Department of Defense agency. That would not be the House or the Senate, as recently as March, about retrievals from off-world vehicles not made on this earth. That is a quote that for me is unsubstantiated. There is zero evidence to confirm that he gave classified briefings on off-world vehicles not made of this earth. I'm not going to go off on a tangent here, although it is deserving, because I believe this is wildly misreported. I want to be proven wrong. So when somebody has evidence, please let me know. I will eat crow and go, you know what? Apparently Dr. Davis gave a classified briefing on alien spaceships. I was wrong. Until then, I do believe that the New York Times article was wildly misleading. And as we know from the multiple corrections that they've noted, along with those that you can prove that they didn't note, but actually changed the information anyway, this is unsubstantiated. Regardless, though, you'll see here, Mr. Davis said he also gave classified briefings on retrievals on unexplained objects to staff members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on October 21, 2019, and to staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee 2 days later. Why am I pointing that out? Dates are completely different, so again, that's to be noted. But regardless, this is the Senate Armed Services Committee. Also, no evidence to support that he gave these types of classified briefings. This was an example, though, of what was changed but not acknowledged. It was originally reported that he gave it to the Senate members of that committee. I checked the calendars. It wasn't there. The New York Times ended up adding these words, staff members. So Dr. Davis could have met with any number of staff. I don't dispute that. He likely did. I've never said that didn't take place. But in a classified setting on off-world vehicles not made of this earth, yeah, jury's way out on that. There's zero evidence. Regardless, here's the Twitter post that I posted that it was likely the Navy and not Dr. Davis. This is where D. Dean Johnson comes back in. Here's his Twitter handle up here if you're listening. It's at D. Dean Johnson. I recommend following his stuff. Again, great researcher. Shout out to him for reaching out to Dr. Davis and he as well aimed to confirm this. I've reached out to Davis many, many times. He don't like me too much, but I know that Johnson's much of a nicer guy than I am, apparently, and gets those responses. And with permission, Mr. Johnson allowed me to share this with you guys. This is Dr. Davis's response to Johnson inquiring about these briefings. So going back to the document that I had discovered that the House Armed Services Committee, essentially Dean had reached out and said, hey, is there a connection here? Did you do this? Because there were those theories floating out there on Twitter by the quote-unquote UFO Twitter crowd and some YouTube channels that were starting to put this out there, that essentially my skepticism against the claims by the New York Times was unfounded. This essentially proved the reporting, and it was Davis that did it. All of that is essentially bunk, and Davis confirms that. I'm going to go ahead and read Dr. Davis's response to you. He says, quote, "No, I did not brief or participate in any UAP-related briefings to anyone in either house of Congress this year, nor have I been in Washington, D.C. this year because of the COVID business travel ban that my employer instituted in early March. Regards, Eric W. Davis." So he himself shoots down that theory. You can note here that it was Project Unity, that YouTube channel that was floating that. Sadly, all unsubstantiated, unfounded, and that hurts. Mr. Johnson had pointed this out on Twitter. I have spoken very, very loudly about it. That type of, I guess, unfounded speculation really hurts this type of topic. And I do hope that some of these people that are trying to create, a fan base or a YouTube channel by their own admission, that's what they're doing, they focus a little bit more on accuracy. It's really confusing, don't get me wrong. We all make errors. I make them myself all the time. But we should at least own up to it and make sure that we kind of take a step back a little bit, make sure that we're disseminating factual information. I know that I'm a big meanie to some people for pointing these things out, but it needs to be pointed out because we still see, at least I do anyway, people will, for example, say, well, Senator Harry Reid said that UAPs are off-world vehicles and so on and so forth. We know that the New York Times originally reported that and then retracted it. There's no evidence to say that Reid was reneging on anything that he said because there was no direct quote. I'm bringing this up because the damage is done on the initial reporting or the initial send out of those speculative either theories or just downright bad reporting. The damage is done the moment that happens because, not to repeat myself, I still get those people rebutting what I might say. And they'll come back and say, well, Senator Harry Reid said these are off-world vehicles. Never once acknowledging, or in fairness, even knowing that the New York Times went and retracted all of that. That has to stop. That's why these things are important to point out. So I kept digging, though. As I mentioned earlier in the program, I reached out to the House Armed Services Committee, went through a couple spokespeople, finally ended up talking to an aide who would go on the record. This is used with permission. They asked me not to say a name. That is standard. You can check any major media outlet. A lot of times you'll see quoted aides familiar with the briefing or whatever. Those are not anonymous sources. Rather, they are officially speaking to you, but you're just asked not to name that specific person, and I completely honor that. The official statement I got was short and sweet. We can confirm that the briefing was with the Navy. Now, that was not easy to get. Sounds like a pretty easy question to answer, but the original response to me from the House Armed Services Committee, they wouldn't talk to me. Now, that may have come off too harsh. They talked to me, but I meant on the record. They wouldn't add anything. They said we don't talk about classified briefings. Sorry, needed a coffee shot there. So they wouldn't talk about classified briefings. And I get that. So what I did in a response was gave them the letter that the Drive had reported on and pretty much just used common sense and said, okay, your specific committee is allegedly being briefed by the Navy. Here's the official letter by the Navy. I'm just looking for confirmation, and that's what yielded that response. Now back to Keith Basterfield and D. Dean Johnson for doing great work. They jumped right on the task force part of this. They had, with strong evidence behind them, speculated that it was the Future of Defense Task Force that was part of the House Armed Services Committee that received that briefing. They as well pushed. So speculation is fine if you aim to confirm it. Speculation is not fine when you just don't care if you confirm it, nor even try. So what I wanted to point out there was they said, we theorized this is the task force, and to their credit, went out and confirmed it themselves. They spoke to the same aide that I did, same spokesperson, and they confirmed that it was the Future of Defense Task Force. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, this task force was a bipartisan group, so Republicans and Democrats, that was chartered to review and assess the state of the national security innovation base to meet emerging threats. Essentially, they were looking at from a national security standpoint, what's out there and how can it hurt us? And so they created this report this year, actually, not too long ago, that was the final report of their committee. Interestingly, even though they were briefed on UAPs, there is no sign or did they allude to the UAP threat within their report. I found that interesting. I'm kind of curious why. I am not aware that they have a classified version of this. I believe that they only created one report. It's on the Black Vault if you're on the YouTube channel. I also linked that as well. If there was a classified version, I'm not aware of it as of the recording of this video, but I'm still pursuing to answer that. I'm still pursuing that as a possibility where they did mention UAPs in a classified version. Regardless, the one that was public, not so much. Now, the confusion by some was this task force. And why I wanted to expand this video a little bit was, again, create this timeline, because this all happened about March of this year. It was not until August of this year that the DoD announced the UAP task force. Now, we already know what task force they were referring to, but I did want to at least alert those who weren't aware. There is a group created by the Department of Defense, authorized on August 4th of 2020 by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, David Norquist, that they would create a task force to investigate unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, that's pretty important. If you weren't aware of that, I wanted to make sure that I at least said it, because I'm not sure how much I've talked about this on this channel anyway, have on various interviews, but on this channel anyway, if you're not aware, this UAP task force, or UAPTF, as they refer to it as, has been created and is operating to understand the UAP phenomena, whatever it may be. This was the official press release that I'm showing you on the video from August 14th, 2020. This was the official acknowledgement. Now, after I talked to the House Armed Services Committee about that task force, I knew the task force wasn't the UAPTF, but I did reach out to the Pentagon to try and get some kind of idea of what was in this briefing. What did the Navy say? Now we can confirm, beyond any shadow of a doubt, it was the Navy. So I often talk about this step process and research. This was an example of that. So now we have it documented. It was the Navy. So I reached out to the Navy. Sadly, anything UAP related has to go through the Pentagon and their spokesperson, Susan Goff. I've pronounced that wrong in the past, so my apologies to Miss Goff, but it is Susan Goff, and she now responds to everything UAP related. So I was crossing my fingers I might get Joseph Gradisher, who was a spokesperson who talked to me last year, broke a big story about their UAP designation, was hoping he'd go on the record. Sadly, he did not. However, Susan Goff did. Here's what she said. Navy officials provided a classified briefing to the House Armed Services Committee on March 11th, 2020. Navy officials, as part of the UAPTF, have and will continue to meet with interested congressional members and staffers to provide classified briefings on the progress of our efforts to understand and identify these threats to the safety of our aviators and security of our operations. Follow-up discussions with other interested members and/or staffers will also continue as necessary or requested. We will not comment on the specific information provided in these Hill briefings. So obviously they don't want to talk about it. That's pretty evident. They're shutting this down. I have done other videos here about the Freedom of Information shutdowns. I urge you to watch those. But this happened this week, November 3rd, just a few days ago from the dropping of this video and this podcast. They do not want to talk about it. What I did deduce from this was that the UAP Task Force has already. So from just from August of August 4th here of 2020, they obviously have already briefed officials because, as she stated, Navy officials as part of the UAPTF have and will continue to meet with interested congressional members. So I took that as, since August 4th, the UAPTF has already briefed interested congressional members and staffers. So that is fairly interesting. But we know that the Senate and Congress has already been briefed, as reported by Politico and other outlets as well. But kudos to Brian Bender of Politico, who reported about the Senate briefings prior to the task force, but done by the Navy, or likely done by the Navy, telling them about UAPs. This was back in June of 2019. So these UAP briefings have happened long before the task force. So I think the senators that are seeing this or hearing this are realizing, okay, this has to be more of a concerted effort. Hence, fast forward to what I just talked about with the task force. That's why they did a more concerted effort to at least address this, addressed it to those congressmen, senators, and so on that are interested. I pushed harder. For those of you who know me, I don't stop. And so I pushed the Pentagon again for the other members of the task force. We can now establish officially, based on the previous statement that she gave, the Navy is part of that task force. We already knew that. Don't get me wrong. That really is no big revelation. But at least they're starting to talk about and connect those men and women that were part of the Navy that are now a part of the task force that are doing the briefings. But my question when I pushed back was, okay, if the briefings themselves were classified, then don't tell me anything about them. But I then asked about the other members. Would it be the Air Force? Would it be the CIA? Would it be the NSA? Would it be the Department of Agriculture? Part of it is a little bit obvious and essentially a given. But I needed it in writing. And again, those are all little tidbits you use from a legal angle to then pursue documents. There's some out there that fire at me and say the FOIA will never work and you won't get anything. Well, I'm thinking about doing a video just to show you guys exactly what has come out about UAPs and UFOs via the FOIA that never was released before, and it was the FOIA that brought it. A lot of people don't want to acknowledge that. They rather just put me down. But regardless, I always like to show you guys a little bit about how the research works and how once you establish a point and have a legal citation where I can legally cite a Pentagon statement, they may shoot it down later on, and I'll deal with that when it comes. But again, those are legally citable pieces of material because they are official, which makes it a little bit easier to get this information out. Here was the Pentagon's last response to me. I have nothing further for you on that, meaning the task force, beyond what was in the press release. The press release, I invite you all to read. Sadly, it did not answer my question. Regardless, though, this shows essentially the mindset that the Pentagon is in, where they just don't want to tell us anything. One of the last things I want to do for you guys here in this final slide is essentially put together a timeline, a little bit of what I just talked about, and then a few other points that are all citable. These are all reported and verifiable, but at least give you an idea about how the last, year and a half or so has taken place, although I do have something here from 2015, which I'll go over. But this at least shows you how much has gone on when it comes to the UAP and UFO topic. Now, I started back in 2015 and special shout out to Politico here for breaking this story, that the Navy had originally issued UFO reporting guidelines back in 2015. This was discovered when Brian Bender was reporting on the classified UFO reporting guidelines in 2019, realizing that in researching this, that was not new. It was actually a reissue from 2015 guidelines that maybe just kind of fell on deaf ears, that they failed to really adhere to the guidelines. So for whatever reason in 2019, which motivated the Navy, they reissued them and said, look, you guys need to follow this. It was reported by Politico when it was in draft form, and again, kudos to Brian Bender for breaking that. I had started pursuing a different angle on it and realized that then it was issued. I went after the actual message that went out via the FOIA, and they considered 100% of it classified. So not only was the guideline itself classified, but the message that was sent, it was called a message to the fleet, that as well was classified. I'd gone after that and failed to get it through FOIA. So they shut that down. But they changed the language of it being a draft document to a final document. So it was actually issued and sent out. So that was early 2019 when Politico broke that story and put out there that the Navy was really taking that seriously. June 19th, 2019, Senators Mark Warner et al., which means there were more senators involved in the briefing. The list is unknown, but we do know that Mark Warner was briefed on the UAP topic in a classified setting. Didn't talk about it much, but he did acknowledge that he received the briefing. July 16th, 2019, Congressman Mark Walker wrote the Navy about UAPs. He was seeking answers on what the Navy had in regards to the topic. July 31st, 2019, Congressman Walker received a reply from the Navy, which stated that the House Armed Services Committee will receive additional briefings. I showed that earlier in this presentation, and kudos to the War Zone for really pushing that angle and coming out with the response that Walker received that had never been out before. September 10th, 2019, the United States Navy admitted to the Black Vault and me personally that the FLIR 1, gimbal, and the Go Fast videos were designated UAPs. They maintained the videos were never released publicly. In fact, they never really even acknowledged that they were genuine, but they acknowledged what the designation was. That was huge, huge news in September 2019. It went viral. Hundreds of outlets reported it, and that was a huge discovery to make. March 11th, 2020, a classified UAP briefing was given to the House Armed Services Committee and the Future of Defense Task Force. That was a document I showed you earlier. That was March. April 27, 2020, 3 UAP videos were officially released to the public, again stating the UAP designation by the U.S. Navy. Now, this seemed like a proactive release, like they were being transparent. I truly believe that a Freedom of Information Act request that I had going that was very, very close to being completed, that I put up a solid case for them to either declassify if they did consider if they were classified, which I already had a statement from the Navy that they were not, but put up a good case that they could release those videos on an official level. That went on for months and months and months. And the statements that I had put together, along with the publicly available information, I felt that they were in a pickle, that there was no way they could deny them. So they did the official release on April 27, 2020. And about an hour after it was dumped online with a DoD press release, I received the final answer to that request within about an hour. And they said, well, we released these publicly. Here you are. So I think that they realized that they didn't have a chance on this one. They needed to release those videos. On screen, I'm showing you the case number. It was from the Department of the Navy, 2019-008289. You can all verify that. I'm going after actually some additional documentation supporting that theory I'm putting forward, that they were in that legal bind, that there was no way that they could keep these things hidden. So I think that case played a role, and more documents when I get them will be posted. June 17th, 2020, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, chaired by Senator Marco Rubio, issued a report requesting an unidentified aerial threat report, which was all tied to Senate Bill 3905. So they had the Senate Bill 3905, and then the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence issued essentially another report on top of that should the bill go through, they wanted X, Y, and Z, and one of those items was a report on UAPs, which was a pretty big find that they are pushing for that. The report will be public, but it can have a classified annex. What that essentially means, sadly, is that the public report will probably be very washed down and watered down, and the classified annex, I will bet money that there would be one, will be very hard to get our hands on. August 4th, 2020, just a couple months after the Senate Select Committee issued that report, the UAP Task Force, or UAPTF, is officially formed within the Department of Defense. As the Pentagon has told me, that is through the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, or OUSDI. And yes, if that sounds familiar, that's the same office that Luis Elizondo worked, who says that he headed the ATIP program investigating UFOs. September 23rd, 2020, the Future of Defense Task Force issues the final report of their task force, but there was no mention of UAPs, despite the briefing that they got. They go into a lot of other topics, no indication there was a classified report or version of the same, yet UAPs were omitted. Why? Your guess is as good as mine, but it should be noted. And finally, November 4th, 2020, just a couple days ago when I dropped this video and this podcast, the Pentagon officially told me they're not releasing anything else on the UAPTF. So we're a little bit out of luck. What does all that mean? Well, it's 2020. Zombies could come tomorrow. In fact, I'm waiting for that. I've been preparing my entire life for zombies to come. But it's 2020, and if zombies came tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised. So where this goes from here, I have absolutely no idea. But at least you guys now have a timeline, documented proof that this is all happening, and we can dispel some of those myths and rumors that are floating out there that are unfounded and unsubstantiated. This topic deserves the respect that it should get, and that's accuracy. That's it. I know some people hate me for saying it, but that's what I try and do here on this channel. As I mentioned earlier, if you can, hit those thumbs up buttons, 5 stars on the podcast reviews. That's what I aim for. They all help a lot. And make sure you help pass the word. There's much more to come here on this channel, so make sure you do subscribe. Thank you so much for listening or watching, whichever way you prefer. This is John Greenwald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.